Hey everyone, and welcome to your favorite, my favorite, everybody's favorite YouTube series. It's a phenomenon, not another demo. As everyone knows, not another demo. This is our chance to have real conversations with security companies and vendors out there. No acronyms, no marketing, no jargon, just real information. We're certainly going to do that again on what is episode 25. Blowing my mind. We've done 25 of these. Well, we've done 24. We're doing 25th one of this. So with me and back in action from missing the last one due to injury is Anthony. So he and I will represent the Really Bad Security team today. And we're thrilled this week to be talking about managed detection and response and SOC as a service, some stuff we actually haven't really talked about yet. With Matt Peters, Peter Silberman and Jim Jakary from Expel. So Jim, with that, I'm gonna pass it over to you, let you guys do some real quick introductions, and then we'll dive into it.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Matt. Well, nice to see everyone virtually these days. It'll be great to meet in person. For those I haven't met, my background a little bit, 20 years ago, I was the 12th employee of a company called Research in Motion that made Blackberries. Yeah. So I worked with some companies like Whirlpool and Meyer and Steelcase and Stryker to make connecting to your wireless device as easy as connecting to the internet. And then when those became less of a thing, I joined a company called Mass 360 and worked with some companies like Herman Miller and Amway in the state of Michigan to make securing those mobile devices as easy as connecting to the internet. So fast forward into this decade, and I'm now with Expel, working with companies to help cybersecurity be as easy as connecting to the internet. So how we go about doing that, I've got a couple of colleagues here who can introduce themselves, but looking forward to the talk and working with everybody going forward. So,
Matt, I'll throw it over to you.
Absolutely. I'm Matt Peters. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Expel. Thanks so much for having us on. My background, I've been doing software development and security for about nigh on 25 years now. Got my start doing software development, deep packet inspection, IPS, that kind of stuff. Ended up moving into wireless and wireless security encryption, that kind of thing, and then ended up at Mandiant, leading the managed service there. We're focused on nation state attackers, that sort of stuff. We got acquired by FireEye. Then we decided, hey, why don't we do it ourselves? And so a couple of the founders and Pete and I started up Expel to sort of help people improve their security. That was about 4.5 years ago. Been here ever since doing the do. So thanks for having us on again.
Yeah, very nice. Peter, they warned me about you, so we're saving what I hear is the best for last. So.
Oh, that's a lot of pressure. I'm afraid I might crumble. So hi, I'm Peter Silberman. I'm the CTO at Expel. I got my start in security many years ago doing vulnerability discovery in the early 2000s and subsequently joined a small company at the time called Mandiant, where I was hired to do reverse engineering and build out a bunch of the agent capabilities in what was the first endpoint product, which went on to be kind of help create the EDR space. Did a bunch of stuff at Mandiant pre-acquisition, everything from endpoint development to working on the malware team through the FireEye acquisition. Worked with Matt at Mandiant and then FireEye and some of the founders, and so kind of all joined up together to do it again and try to do it differently.
Sounds good. And it looks like we're actually being graced with the presence of our very own Aaron Bregg as well. So Aaron, welcome. We don't need to introduce you. Everybody knows you. And if they don't, just check out my shirt. So welcome. So for the Expel folks, Aaron is another member of the Really Bad Security crew and works for a major healthcare organization in West Michigan. I think that's how he introduces himself. So I took care of it for him. Mm-hmm. So anyways, guys, let's talk, I guess, you know, I always like to start with this question because I do think it's an important one, and that is the why. So we look at our calendars right now. I opened mine up this morning, and there was not a single gap in it. And that seems to be routine for a lot of folks these days. You know, I think hopefully that changes, but I think through the course of the pandemic, everyone was like, just put meetings galore on your calendars. And so we are all kind of being meetinged to death. So that being said, why would an organization, want to carve out an hour of their day and talk with Expel? So Matt, I'll pass that one over to you.
Okay. So just to start with, is sort of an off the cuff thing. We're very nice people, so talking to us is usually hopefully fun, right? Yeah. I think we're all on that, and I mean I totally feel you. My calendar's super booked and things like this as well. One of the main things that we actually started, and we started Expel before the pandemic, but it's somewhat apropos now, is this idea that so many people that we work with are on a treadmill, like they're just like the daily grind is kind of overwhelming, and so our ability to get ahead is just negligible, right? And so fundamentally, what we're in the business of doing is taking a look and helping people like make that space by taking off some of the work that's sort of treadmill work. I mean, is it really important for you to get that much better at some things versus having some people at a company help? And so that's primarily how we see our mission, and it is actually the mission statement of our company, is to make space for people to do what they love about security. So do you want to spend a whole bunch of time clicking refresh on that SIM view, or do you want to go do something cool and have somebody else do that? So that's fundamentally, if you're looking for some time back on your calendar, you make the investment of an hour, maybe we can give you a lot more back. That's sort of what I would say there.
So, okay, so that kind of leads us into the topic. And so I guess to get a couple of acronyms out of the way, MDR, Managed Detection and Response. The rule is if we spell it out once, you can go back to using the acronym because we know why they exist. These are terrible words to put together. And Security Operations Center, SOC. So, right, I think I did those right, and we'll get those out of the way. So let's talk a little bit, because I am, like, in my job, I'm running into these conversations a lot lately, honestly, as people are struggling with, not having enough people, or like you said, not wanting their people doing all this rudimentary stuff when there's more important things that they should be doing
or even just alert fatigue,
or just, yes, exactly. And burning people out. Right. And sometimes, honestly, people will leave a job to go to another job just to like get different alert fatigue, right? It's still too many alerts, but at least they're different alerts, or it's a different domain name or something. So you get so I guess talk a little bit about your industry, maybe some reasons why you're seeing people, make those, or dive a little deeper into, why you're seeing people make the move into doing some of this stuff.
Sure. So like, backing up for a second and talk a little bit about the origin of some of these problems, because one of the things that's interesting is like we have a snapshot in time which says, oh, okay, like we've got alert fatigue, there's too much signal, we don't have enough talented professionals, and just generally like it's a bit of a morass. But like we got here for some reasons, right? So backing up to the early days when security information and event management system, SIMs, kind of became popular and compliance became a thing. A lot of people were like, hey, setting these up is really complex. And if you were using an old school SIM, like an on-prem SIM, this is before cloud was really a thing, it took a lot of expertise just to keep the disk spinning. I mean, you had like, that was a job in and of itself. And then you got, events into this thing, and then you had people looking at it, and maybe you find some security in there. And when compliance regimes became sort of more of a thing, trusting third parties to take that work over for you, so you knew that somebody was watching and it wasn't your core business, became kind of a thing. So you see, managed security service providers, MSSPs, come out. So think, your Symantec's and SecureWorks and things like this. These were some of the first in the market to say, we'll take all this log data from you and we'll watch it for you, and you don't really have to worry about it. And that let people, to a certain extent, focus a little bit more on whatever their core mission as a security team might be, and a little less on, can I keep a bunch of disks spinning and get a bunch of event processing going on?
Except for when you needed some critical data out of that, getting that from them was
someone who's lived that before. It sounds like.
Yeah, sounds like you might have tread some of the same road, right? So and I think Aaron makes a really valid point, which is like, and that model worked if what you were looking for was compliance, right? Like I think somebody is watching this stuff, but if you actually had an incident, and this was something that we ended up seeing a lot, Mandiant, was when you got attacked by somebody who knew what they were doing and they were moving quickly, and you needed some really good forensics real fast. A third-party SIM thing wasn't necessarily always the best solution. And so what we saw there was, and Pete helped build one of the first, is the rise of much better endpoint telemetry and forensics and things like this. So like nowadays these companies, your Sentinel ones, Carbon Black, CrowdStrike, this sort of stuff came along and said, we're going to enable response, not just detection, but a response where we can investigate as people have been attacked. That came with the same problem. Okay, now I've given you another really complex piece of technology and it's not necessarily your core competence. So what are you going to do? And that's where the MDR space really came in and said, okay, well, if you're looking at detection and response and looking at like high quality, investigations and forensics and really running things down to root cause on live attackers and things like this, an MDR really shines. And so actually managed defense was one of the first MDRs out of FireEye, and a number of people have come along and vendors sort of stepped into that, managing their own EDR. So you have CrowdStrike, who has a service. They have both Overwatch, but they also have a thing called Falcon Complete that does that work. And the idea here is, if it's not your core competence, if it's not your core business to respond to an attacker and run it down, then you may be better off trusting that to people who do it 24/7, like 365, right? Like,
that
might be a thing.
That leads me to two questions.
Sure.
The first is, are you guys platform agnostic? So are you just watching it for me, or is Expel another platform I have to deploy?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the way that we went around solving the problem is we saw this exact thing, which was vendors showing up and saying, okay, cool, whatever you bought, that's fine, but you need to deploy this extra thing. And we were like, that's not super cool, right? Because what if you bought an endpoint? What if you like SentinelOne as an example, right? Let's go with that. What we did was we said the way to make people effective in their environments is to integrate with their stuff. So we actually built a layer of software that integrates with customers' technology. So your EDRs, your network, your SIM tech, brings in the relevant signal, augments it with a lot of decision support and stuff like this. So that then what I'll do is I'll make someone combat effective. I will share a sort of an observation, which is that when you take all the EDR tech and you line it up and you ask a practitioner, give me the top 7 things you want to do, it's always the same. And it's always supported in all those technologies, right? So if I can build a platform that augments those with those capabilities, I can support lots of stuff, and I don't have to have my people worrying about, oh, well, in Carbon Black the command is this, and in CrowdStrike you have to pivot and use this menu, right? And the same thing's true. The customer doesn't have to care if I'm I can only support Carbon Black. No, I'll support
You're just doing API magic to tie all that in
exactly
your central control server, basically. Yeah.
Precisely. And the thing is, that's one of the things that's the nicest about sort of the modern ecosystem is we're no longer limited to just one-way log data, right? We have APIs. We can ask follow-up questions, query, things like this. And so as people are building out their security platforms, understanding that this tech that you're buying has tremendous amount of capability that it didn't even 10 years ago, right? So why would people buy an MDR? Well, fundamentally, one of the number one things that we see is like, I go talk to security teams and I ask them like, what is it actually like? If you got $1 million, what would you do with that $1 million that would make your business more successful? Right? Like that's the question to ask. And most of the time it is
Security
not
education.
Exactly. Yeah. No, 100%. It is this kind of thing. Exactly right, Eric. It is the kind of thing like we're saying, well, I want to spend time making sure my users don't click on ridiculous links. I need to spend time building a legit compliance program because every time the auditors show up, it's a goat rodeo, like whatever it is. I want to build a better risk profile for the business and actually make some investments in other things. Those are the kinds of things where it's like, I'm going to be valuable to my specific business because of my specific needs, not generally like I'm going to build my own IR team. Like that's beyond the capabilities of most organizations. And if you're spending a lot of time on that and you've only got a team of 4, that might not be a place to spend.
That kind of leads me to my second question as well. Yeah. What do you, I'm sure you want to sell to everybody, right? But do you guys have a target,
who's your
companies? Are you guys targeted at SMBs who, don't necessarily have the talent or necessarily, have the full SOC and size to be able to support some of this?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Now, I'd say our target market's a little bit in terms of size, a little wide. So we sort of go like, it's probably 1,000 up, right? And that tends to be because at about 1,000 people is when you start having an actual security estate. It's not like I've got some third-party managed laptops or something. It's like, well, we have an EDR and we have a SIM, something like this. The up part is interesting because one of the things is, a couple of our customers are gigantic. And this is where I think it gets really interesting when you think about security as strategy in your business, right? So one of our customers in particular is a giant organization. And they said, look, it is our core, what we want to do is we want to focus on some particular mechanicals in our business. We have some unique things about our business, unique properties, unique, you can think about like unique equipment. And we want to spend our time monitoring that. Like everything else in the business is commodity monitoring. We want someone else to handle that. Right. And so they made a very, very conscious decision about that. So they're a gigantic organization.
And it made your job easier too.
Yeah, well, exactly. So the thing is, at the end of the day, you got to think about like what resources are finite in every organization. Where do you want to spend them? Right. Well, they wanted to spend their resources on the thing that made them most effective for their specific business and have us do the rest of it. And so that's where I think we get into kind of interesting stuff. At the end of the day, though, oh, yeah, Pete.
I was gonna say there's another profile we're seeing where it's less than 1,000, but a big cloud estate, right? Because cloud's allowing you to scale and get velocity for your engineering team. So you don't end up with as many employees and you're still building a very large business when you think about the impact. And that's another place where we can come in and all the things Matt said about like, well, you want to focus on your equipment. There's definitely security. Most securities want to focus on the application security, the actual running of their SaaS platform, whatever they've built, and not necessarily deal with the commodity related infrastructure alerts or investigations, and creating space, because that also gives them the space to work with their stakeholders, right? Security is a team sport. And if you're going to be successful, you need to have great relationships with IT, HR, engineering, all these other teams. And that takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. No product can enable that. And one of the things you get is, okay, this is commoditized, push it off to the side, let someone else handle it. I can have really bespoke business impacting conversations with my stakeholders and enable them. And then you get to an interesting place. So that's where
and I really like that too, because in both of these guys, I probably chuckle because I say it all the time, but I'm always telling tech people to get out of their tech bubbles, because you're coming to me with a tech problem, with a technical answer, and the business really doesn't care about your technical problem. They care about their business problem. So you need to be able to translate that to how you're providing value to the business.
Yeah, so Matt,
reducing risk, or what have you.
Sorry, Matt Peters. We have two Matts now. So I'm gonna give you a softball question, because you didn't use one of the most hated words in our board. You had the opportunity to say single pane of glass. You did not. So you get a softball question. So looking at the Forrester wave, which, like the Gartner stuff, I always take with a grain of salt. I do like some Gartner people. Gartner sometimes gets a little fluffy. It's a pretty crowded market, right? So here's your softball question. I guess what sets Expel apart from, there's some pretty big names on here, CrowdStrike, Rapid7, Sentinel-1, they're the big boys right now, because some of them have done a good job of pivoting. Of course, we tease CrowdStrike a little bit because they got hit a little bit at the MITRE stuff, but they're rebounding, right? So what makes you different, right? Here's your softball question. What makes you different than CrowdStrike or like a Sentinel-1?
So it's a great question, and I appreciate the softball. I explicitly tried to avoid full, single pane of glass. So I think I'd say the following. There's a couple things that we focused on that make us a little bit different. The first thing is that we actually spend a lot of time focusing on response. They're like catching threats, like finding bad things going on in your environment. There's lots of technology out there that already does that. And so, like, if you think about a lot of the vendors who are riding it on top of their own equipment, they're spending a lot of resources making sure that like that EDR, catches the most recent threats, and like how well does it do against the MITRE ATT&CK framework and that sort of thing. And we're making sure that our customers, because we adapt to all this different technology, have a really good solid detection framework. But that's not 100% where we lean on, because we know that the number one thing that our customers are really asking about is, once the balloon goes up, what now, right? And so that's where we focused on response and transparency. The idea that in our platform, working with us, you can see every single thing that we do. You can actually see us as we do it, and you can do it yourself if you want to. And these were things that we started out like very, very early on. So I was employee number one. I'd love to be able to take credit and say this was a brilliant idea I came up with in all of my strategy. We kind of lucked into this, honestly, which was we were building our UI, and we were like, we want to be transparent, because that exactly the point you made earlier about MSSPs being kind of a black box. We're saying, well, no, we actually want people to be able to see every step in the investigation. So if they have questions, if they want to understand how we got to a conclusion, they can see the entire chain, all the evidence we collected, everything, right? They could see it in real time. And then I was like, well, hey, since our analysts are using this platform to do their work, What if we just let the customers use it too? What if they could just make it read write as well? And what that's led us to is engagements where, I was talking about that customer earlier with the large estate and they're handling some things. We're actually working in tandem with them. Like some investigations they're actually helping us with, we're helping them with things. There's this amazing back and forth that happens in the platform because of that. And it's the focus on response being answering the questions the customer wants to know about the things and doing it in a transparent way that I think does differentiate us against some of the other competitors. Now, that is not to say that they don't do good solid work. Like that's one of the things I want to be pretty clear about is that there's a lot of good people doing solid work in the MDR space. I think we just have a slightly different take in terms of what we think the important part of that problem really is to solve. So hopefully I got to a little bit.
No, you did, because we actually, when we were doing our swag giveaway for an event we have later this week or this afternoon.
This afternoon.
I've lost time. My day job, my day job messes with my time frame. We talked about kind of like the network gear space, right? So, you have your Cisco's and your Palos and everything else. And for as much as they want to say differently, I know firsthand, there really isn't much difference between hardware between Fortinet, Cisco, and Palo Alto, right? So we know that the next logical thing is software and functionality and modules and everything else. Do you have the means to clearly articulate what areas you do really well and what you don't, right? Because Anthony and I debate this from time to time. Like there's value in you telling us what you can't do, right? Because one of the worst things that you could do with my organization and now with Acrisure, because we're going to make them mini versions of us, right? Well, actually someday they'll be bigger, is that don't blow smoke. If you don't have a salesperson that isn't sure or aware of the product or aware of that functionality, don't try and sell me something that it doesn't do. I will actually have more respect, because it helps us avoid issues. If we do this, and then if Anthony and I throw you a use case and it's not something you're strong at or not something that's relevant to your product,
Don't tell me yes anyways.
Don't tell me yes anyway. So how do you handle that in,
So there's diving in, and I'm sure Jim is sitting there like in a panic because you just asked me something where I'm the chief product officer. I know tons of things we don't do well, so I can go on. But just to lean into a couple things. So one is we're solving like a piece of a much larger problem. We talked about the evolution of the ecosystem and this idea that like, hey, there's an entire compliance play around log storage and maintenance and things like this, and like that is actually not a thing that we do. Right, we don't. And so if you're looking at it saying, well, like my primary buy here, the primary reason why I'm investing in this thing is because I have a HIPAA logging and monitoring compliance issue, and I need to solve that. Like Expel might not be for you, right? Two, and we've done this, like this is actually a thing that we do pretty on the regular. It's weird, but like I know the me's at many of the competitors, and I know what they're good at. And so there are times when we'll talk to a customer and we're like, not us. But I'll tell you who would do that. So another example of a use case that we just can't do is we don't like VPN into somebody's thing and like assign like, here's your 3 people, and it's like a staff aug motion managed SIM is sort of the way that people talk about that, right? That's not how we do our work, right? We do our work in our platform. It helps us scale our people and things like this. I've had people come to us and say, well, no, I actually need eyes on this console. This is how we do it. I just need augmentation there and that sort of stuff. And there's a couple of vendors in the space that do solid work doing that kind of stuff. Same thing with like, you want to put people in a building or something. I can't have data leave my network. Sorry, we do our stuff remotely. So those are some like sort of like table stakes use cases. Kind of
those darn DoD specs that
exactly.
they're so pesky.
Yeah.
So along those lines, earlier you talked about like the API functionality, and I was hopeful, I'm going to be cautiously optimistic on the two-way part, right? And where I'm going with that is a lot of times we see, again, promised functionality on APIs, and Anthony's going to shake his head vehemently in a minute. But it's not as robust. It's not two-way. It lacks, it's stuck in SAML, right? Like some of these companies are understanding that JSON is the future, just saying. It's the universal API language. Are you running into issues with interpreting, like having, like Anthony said, different systems talk to it? Or are you guys taking like a more holistic approach saying, okay, hey, we might have to do a little ETL. Look, I have used an acronym: extract, transform, and oh my gosh, I'm brain load. Thank you. Thank you. I'm brain fading on that one. Before you send it on its way, right? Because you guys are handling critical data. I need to be able to ingest it.
What's your turnaround on something that, you've never integrated with before,
That's your hard question. Sorry, that was a fastball.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna take a stab at it. Pete, as the CTO, can tell me if I'm lying. So one, absolutely true. Like, so we do direct API integrations, and we have sort of a plugin framework. So this is how we've decided to solve the problem. Is like, for each vendor we integrate with, we write a plugin effectively, and that plugin exposes out the top a set of capabilities. So alerting is one capability. Can you send me some alerts? Yes. And they all can, and they all we can normalize that. Generally, that's part's actually not the hard part of the thing. The harder part we've discovered is I'd like my analysts to be able to ask to get a process listing and a set of network connections off of any EDR out there, right? So how do I get that done, and how do I normalize that into something that my analysts can work with? And so that's like, when I say a capability, that's the kind of capability we'd use. So for each one of our vendors, we identify a set of capabilities that are like canonical use cases. If you think about like an NTA or any sort of network box, it's going to be things like, can you get me a packet capture? Can you get me given an IP address, can you get me the pivot table around it, NetFlow, ... this kind of stuff. And so our platform exposes those. The turnaround time on like a new integration depends on effectively like how well have they planned that stuff out. So there's some places where like literally we go in and I can read the API docs like on a flight on the way home from a customer site or something and be like, yeah, we got this, it's fine. And then it's just a matter of scheduling it with the engineering team, because it's really not a big deal.
Development maturity. I just want to say that's a company that understands the importance of development, software development maturity.
Well, it's shocking, and I'll tell you. I mean, just not to vent or anything, but to say like, if when we ask, hey, are there API docs, and somebody gives me a URL, and I go to the URL, and there's one of these expandable things that has like here's it in Ruby, here's it in JavaScript, and here's it in Python, and here's a sample response. I'm like, okay, there's a developer on the other end of this that cares about me and my experience. If, on the other hand, I get a PDF document whose watermark says something in the early 2000s, we're in big trouble, right? That's sort of that's the range, and that integration may take a little bit longer, right? The second thing about this is like how deep and how rich the experience really is, because there are other devices that have some really interesting capabilities, and how do we expose those? And so if we're gonna discover, oh, we're adding to our capability model because, for instance, there's an amazing threat graph that we can actually get access to if we do it, that would add time on it, but it doesn't take us a long time. Pete, I don't know if I lied on any of that.
No, I think you hit it for the most part. I think the things I'd add is either interesting nuances we've discovered that we've accounted for that kind of our platform now just account for with the framework. So an example is there's actually a lot of race conditions. If you do any kind of a time-based polling of alerts, there are really interesting race conditions you can hit without much effort around when an alert shows up and when it's actually available via an API. Those are two different things. And so if you don't have a mechanism that can actually look back to ensure nothing was missed, you're going to be in a bad spot. And that comes with our framework for free now, because we've had some learnings. We've been doing this for 5 years. The other thing that can sometimes take time is, there's data in the UI when we're doing integration, and it turns out it's available via another route, and we want it to show up as part of one event. We kind of think about this as a synthetic event, or stitching a bunch of fields together. We'll put the time in so we get this really rich event, and that also makes our analysts way more efficient. Some of that we can see in the docs, and some of that shows up later because we have a whole process for feedback. We're really lucky that the customers using the integrations are also used to be sitting next to us, but now are virtually sitting next to us. They can provide feedback and can iterate. So we have this kind of unfair advantage of our users are thinking about all the data they want access to, and they still have access to the product. So if they pivot the product and they're like, hey, I end up looking for this piece of data, they go back to the engineering team and say, hey, why isn't this data in the richness of the alert? So we have this other motion that kind of makes our integrations effective over time, that we can kind of really scale up. It gets pretty cool. And then you end up with some really interesting challenges with, like, we've got a couple of SaaS integrations that are really interesting, where the vendors made some decisions about what's available in the data for various privacy reasons, like IP, for example, not there sometimes.
Oh, trust me, I could tell you some
healthcare.
I could tell you some healthcare stories about
Yeah, so when that
kind of
happens,
level.
we don't just necessarily accept it. We're like, well, okay, the IP is not in these sets of events, but maybe it's somewhere else, and we can store it off and kind of do a lookup and glue it together. So we do spend that time, and that can also put it out there. But if it's just a standard thing, like Matt said, we've got Swagger docs, we've got a couple different command examples. There's an engineer that cares on the other end. We're pretty fast at this point because it looks the same to us. We've done, over 60 of these at this point.
So you talked about it. No, was it Anthony?
No, it was
Or was
me.
that
Go
Matt?
ahead.
So I was a little bit excited to hear you talked about like two-way API functionality, right? So one of the big things I'm going to call out is, speaking of, when you get sold vaporware, right? So a major networking company and their visibility product that was almost invisible. One of my frustrations was around not being able to take action. So getting alerts, right? And this is where Anthony just cringes, and one of his colleagues, I know that she cringes, not be able to take action on it, right? So with this API, are you able to push out to other areas? And where I say that is I'm leaning on some vendor friends is, we talk about next gen technology and AI and everything else. And I'm going to sound like colleague Chris Roberts for a minute. I need some of that to start not being marketing fluff, right? I need it to take the next step. And what I mean by that is I need to know, like a scenario where I have a nurse that's normally stationed at hospital A, and she normally handles this. Now there's an instance she needs to go to hospital B, okay? And, for COVID response or something like that. I need to have, I need to know that I could take action on that, right? Like if we see that kind of behavior and there's not authorization, can we take action on that so that other things happen, right? So, hey, wait a second, she's in the system, she's trying to access this part of the EMR, she's not authorized for that. Yes, an alert goes back to SIM and everything else, but I want that next step stuff. I want it to be able to send an alert to the nurse manager, right? And the nurse manager may say, like if this was a real life phone call, right? So she goes in, she badges into that new station at Hospital Q, and needs new information because she's helping with COVID stuff. I need the system to be able to send an alert, go to the nurse manager. The nurse manager would normally call, right? Hey, Aaron, I have her helping out here today. This is something true, right? Go ahead. Yep. Okay. All right. I'm going to buzz her into section D. A lot of times in the past, we get alert, hey, this is happening, but we can't take action. And I want to be able to have the ability to say, okay, hey, for today, for 24 hours, let's, we check out passwords now, right? But can we check out, can you hook into identity systems and everything else so we can take that next level steps? Because currently right now, as Anthony knows, some of that stuff doesn't exist.
So it's a great question, actually. Like it tees up a really interesting thing because we
multiple interesting things I was going to say. It's kind of
see this. This you're a little in our wheelhouse. So you asked earlier, like, what do we think we do really well? And one of them is like this kind of a thing, right? So what we actually believe at and by Pete and I sort of this is a bit of our religion around the idea that it is not a technology solution. There is an interesting sort of gear works that goes on between you take a bunch of people and a security situation and a bunch of sort of human computer interaction. And if you do it well, it works amazing. And if you don't, it is a disaster, right? And so, or at the worst case, everybody just ends up kind of being frustrated. So in our system, the way that we handle this kind of thing, alert comes up, it goes through a whole bunch of robotics to reach out and grab additional information and things like this. Where is this nurse normally coming from? What are their normal working hours? All that sort of stuff. So our analyst has that kind of information. And by having a human in the loop, and we believe that for a lot of this kind of judgment call, a human's kind of critical, look at this and say okay, it actually, while it doesn't necessarily look legit, right? It doesn't look abnormal because it looks like the same person trying to do the same things they do every day. It's just that they're doing them in a different location. So we had this exact case at a customer where we ended up with the alert was email access, effectively like an access for a O365 from Nigeria. Right. So alarm bell should be going off because that's like the number one source of DEC compromise. Right. But our analyst looked at it and said, yeah, OK, fair enough. But the activity in the email box is not abnormal. Number one. Number two, hey, I'm looking at this. Let me just look up this user real fast. I actually looked him up in LinkedIn. Person graduated from college in Lagos, Nigeria. Oh, okay, so we actually end up texting the management team on the other side saying, hey, is this person on vacation? Yes. Okay, our system's automatically updated to say for the next 2 weeks, if it's coming from Nigeria, that's not necessarily a thing. We're not going to turn off all alerting. So that's the kind of mechanism that you can get. And the two things that we've learned that I think are super cool in the era of Slack, in the era of instant message, in the era of communications that can be fast, you can actually involve other humans, customer humans, in something like generating an incident and still have amazing response time. So another great example, in the cloud, this happens all the time. Middle of the night, somebody uses accesses an AWS API from the console and it triggers an alarm. And we're like, okay, like normally doesn't happen, but that could be an admin in the middle of the night dealing with some sort of, oh no, like we don't know. And so we've ended up in situations where using our platform, the analyst has to reach out and say, ask the question, is this legit behavior of somebody on the other side?
In that use case, I want you to force MFA.
Yeah. So in this case, I'll say, backing up for a second on this, if the user responds with this isn't a thing, like this is a problem, we would go immediately to an incident. In that case, we've had those go, it's 4 minutes from soup to nuts. So like we have pretty good response time. On forcing actions, I'll go with yes, but not all the way there yet. All right. In full transparency, and I'll tell you why.
A for honesty.
So the reality of the situation is we have certain remediations that our analysts will take on behalf of our customers. Not a problem. So like we have customers where we would do that, right? What we've seen historically though is this. The customers will come in and they'll lean in on like, okay, well, I want you to take these remediation actions. And if it's pretty straightforward stuff, contain a host, something that's not super damaging, they're okay. And like EDR use cases seem to lead that, right? On other cases where it's like, well, force a reauthentication, things like this, that's depending on the idea that they do or don't have technology that would let us do that. And two, some of the customers are actually saying like, actually, no, I want that's actually my IT department. That's not me doing that. So therefore you need to contact. And that's where we get into our platform can also open the P1 ticket in their ticketing system to have some IT help desk respond to it. So
integration to like ServiceNow and
precisely
CA and stuff like that.
Exactly.
The other thing I'd call out just as the thing is like, that invasive action breaks the very clear barrier of read-only scopes, right? When you think about interacting with a third party that's a security vendor, a lot of our customers and a lot of people are going to be way more comfortable. Like, no, they can't actually do right actions, right? So that's the other thing is when we move and we go where our customers ask us, and so the like, locking an account is something we're having conversations about now because it's just a couple of API calls we can do it, but it actually changes our onboarding profile and makes the actual permissions we need very different, right? And certain vendors, when you then start going that route, certain vendors haven't thought necessarily at a granular level about this. So for some vendors, I may need admin access versus, the ability to just lock an account. I might not have that granularity. It changes the risk profile of a third party. So it's something to think. It's something that comes up in conversations. We try to dig in to understand, like, for given applications, what's the granularity? Because we don't want any more permissions than you need. I have no desire, right?
No, that's super important.
And
I had one more vendor ask me for a domain admin account. Like, why? Well, because we can do our job.
It's because they're not developing their software correctly.
Yeah. Exactly.
I know you can do your job with that, but you can do any job with that. So I need you to tell me what you need.
You can do all the wrong jobs with that as well.
And also to call out, and just as people are thinking about this, if people are thinking about enabling a third party in this kind of a thing, thinking through those use cases and saying, oh, okay, well, like when we start a relationship with a third party, we may only start here and we have them doing this. And over time, we want to get here. A lot of the customers we work with, that's part of the relationship is to actually work through those use cases. Because prior to that, it was a team of 3 people who were just like, their workflow was, hey, can you do this? Okay, fair enough. I'm back in my glass. Like that's how they've been doing it for years. So involving a slightly more advanced workflow is evolutionary.
See, because that's the difference, right? Is in 2018, it was neat to hear about software that could be like, hey, we're looking that you're logging in from California when it's 3 hours from Michigan. That was great at the time, and I still need that functionality, again, I need to take that next level step. And it's, similar to what like, Abnormal and others are starting to think about user behavior a lot differently.
Sure.
So,
And Aaron, to one point, if something happens once and we come back to you and you say, take this action, great. And then it happens again, you say, take the same action, great. And it happens a third time, you say, why are we repeating this? Is this something that we want to automate? And that's an opportunity to look at workflow and automate some things so that the humans can focus on what humans do best with decision making and not having to continue to do repetitive tasks.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
So
I like those guys to get all those technical questions out of the way, and then I like
because we're almost at time.
Jump back in with some business related questions. So one thing that I know I see in talking with organizations about maybe looking at moving, some stuff outside of their team or whatever is not knowing exactly what to move or how much to move. And so we talk about like MDR, SOC as a service. There's lots of different words that we throw out there. So if I'm a company that maybe has everything in-house right now, but I'm trying to figure out, I need to offload some of this work, or I don't know exactly how much of this work I need to offload from my security team. Can you guys talk a little bit about like interactions with Expel from call one through the process? Do you help companies understand, what they can move and what should stay, and how to, I guess, talk through that scenario a bit?
Sure. And also just to call out, like, we have a bunch of blog posts and there's some really good writing that people have done over the last couple of years as MDR has become more popular around trying to understand like the true cost of operating a capability, right? So one thing that we think about is the first question I would ask people is like, do you have a need for 24/7 coverage? Right? If your business is a 9 to 5 operation and you actually close the doors and you go home and things like this, we have had companies that say, look, like, the 8-hour lag is fine from my risk profile, that sort of stuff. Okay, fair enough. That cuts your cost dramatically. But the second that you want to have 24/7 eyes on glass, quick response, and when I say quick response, I mean like, it's 4 minutes before somebody's pressing the contain button kind of response. Yeah. That's a costly endeavor, right? And if you want to get like even thin coverage and you want to do it well, you're talking about 12 people, right? Because somebody's going to have to go to the bathroom and somebody's going to take vacation and this sort of stuff. And so when you start talking about team size that big, your company's making a significant investment. And then the question I'd ask is it strategically important that you're good at that function? And that function is see an alert, respond to it in sub 10 minutes, remediate and that sort of stuff. Building that capability in-house, is that actually important to you? Almost everybody first knee-jerk response would be yes, it is. Okay, fair enough. Let's tap on that. Let's unpack that for a minute, right? Because you have a budget that's going to get you a team of 6 people, say. Okay, fair enough. Like that budget within your security organization is going to be dealing with compliance requirements. You're going to be dealing with potentially physical security. You're going to be dealing with, user education. You're going to be dealing with like setting up technologies. Like there's so many things that you got to be able to do, and some of those are actually going to be enabling your business, right? So if you build something that has software, for instance, like a production environment in AWS. The trade-off between taking 2 of those people and making them experts at the security of securing an AWS pipeline and working with your developers to make more secure code versus taking those 2 and making them watch a glass, like that's a trade-off. So I would have that conversation with people, and then say, okay, so when you come to that, the next question is, what does your security estate look like and your requirements? Do you have a compliance requirement? Do you need is it log retention? Is that primarily what's driving it? Is it around that you have some critical intellectual property that you're trying to protect, or some critical infrastructure that you're trying to protect, where like a really high quality forensic response is going to be important? What are you really trying to accomplish? Because I think the other thing I run into a lot is security teams who have sort of they've listened to a bunch of vendors and they've gone, okay, all right, I bought a SIM and I've got some stuff going in there. What was next? What was the next part? And it's like, well, rather where are you trying to get to, right? So that's sort of how that first conversation would sort of go. Longer term, I would encourage people to sit down and actually think about. I always ask sort of like my high impact question for people, because it's what I think about a lot. Is, okay, assume for a moment that you had your dream of 6 people, 8 people, 12 people, whatever it was that was part of your security team, and your CEO came and gave you $1 million more. where would you spend it, and what would happen to all the measurable outcomes of the business? Would any of them change? Right. And if they wouldn't, have a hard think about that. Right. Because like most of the time, security ends up just being a cost center, right? Like sort of the Department of No cost center model. Is there a way that you could say, well, hey, if I spent a little bit of money to get rid of this as a function and focused my people on doing this that really enables the business, then we move something else. We move some other metric that's really, really important. And I think it's a useful thought exercise. That's a lot of words, but that's kind of how that conversation might go. And the thing I would encourage people to think about.
I think that's important because again, I think a lot of companies really struggle. They're like, I don't have enough people. I have these security needs, but I don't know where to go, what to do. And I'm hearing all these words and, it's seeing all this marketing jargon, and I don't really know what that means. So I like the fact that you guys are working with folks before to try to figure out exactly how, and maybe getting them to think about some stuff that they didn't, and maybe even being able to quantify some of that stuff as well, right? Going back to Anthony's point about being able to talk to the business, something that security people are terrible about doing is quantifying risk and quantifying what their projects are and the value of their projects and selling that upwards to their board. We are bad at that. One of our missions to help people get better at that. So,
and just one addendum to just say, I have run into before. It is not everyone where it's the answer to should I build a 24/7 operation is no. There have been times where I've actually sat down with people and been like, it is of critical import to your business that you be able to attest that you personally are handling this problem, and you can sell based on that. So go get after it. I could give you some advice on how to build out a really high quality SOC, right? So the conversation changes a little bit. So that happens. It is just really rare, right? That's the overall thing that I've noticed, right? So
no, I think that takes you from being a vendor trying to sell stuff to partnering with the company trying to help them, right? Sometimes you got to have those hard conversations, or sometimes you got to, right? If we're the experts and we should be helping people that maybe have those questions. So, Aaron, Anthony, what always happens with the good conversations? Man, the hour goes by quickly, which is exactly what has happened today. So, I think we got to wrap things up already. I feel like this conversation could go another 45 minutes, but anyways, this is what happens with the good ones. So, Matt, Peter, Jim, I really appreciate you guys being with us today and sharing some insights. Matt, I caught like you did some acronym magic in there where you threw out some stuff and then said the acronym. So you A+, 5 gold stars for you today. So everybody that's watching, so this was episode 25. The best way to not miss episode 26, click that little bell thingy up there to subscribe to our channel, and that way you'll know, or bottom, is it in the bottom? I don't know. Wherever the bell is, click that, and then you get episode 26. We'll show right up for you. So again, guys, we really appreciate you being with us today, and everyone else, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again for episode 26.